Okay, before we start talking about Hoover again, I wanted to give you an assignment. Okay, this will be Tuesday. Okay, kind of cover some things in the book that I don't talk about in my lectures, so a little additional history for you. Number 12 has like 10 or 11 identifies. Okay, so the 10, 12, 14, 16, 18 points. Okay. Now, if you want to do this, you can. If you don't want to, you don't have to. Understand that I'm going to put in 2 points for you guys for video that you watched while I was gone. And I think I gave you some participation points in the thing for listening to my lecture on terrorism for a couple of days, for participating in that. From there, it's going to be, you're going to get a test worth 60 points. And so if you want to do this homework to offset anything that might go wrong on the test next week, okay, it's available there for you. Okay? Good? Okay. So yesterday, we're sinking into this depression, and we were getting into some of the notes on Hoover's policies. Okay? But I made the mention that there's going to be limits to how far Hoover's going to go. Not just based on this premise that the federal government really doesn't do much to this point in American history. Its involvement within the states is very limited. And so anything that is done outside of that is going to be foreign to Hoover and many people in Washington. Then I think I told you guys yesterday Hoover was an orphan, yes? He was a very intelligent young man. He ended up putting himself through Stanford University, and he studied engineering. He is one of 2 American presidents of the 45 that have been engineers. This is good presidential trivia. So they called Hoover the great engineer. Does anybody know who the other engineer was? No? Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter was an engineer and a peanut farmer. I remember that. Okay. So, yeah, both of them kind of go down as, failed presidencies. So, yeah, let's stay away from engineers. Very smart people. Some would say maybe lacking in common sense. At least if I'm speaking of my wife. Okay. All right, that's on video, honey. All right, now, aid for farmers and for businesses. Agricultural Marketing Bill 1929. They're going to create the federal farm bill. Remember, farmers are having some issues. We've got tariffs trying to protect them from, like, Canadian wheat. But as exports begin to fall because of the trade war, prices for farmers are going to start to fall, and it's going to make it difficult for them to sell their crops. And so basically this federal farm board is going to be given $500 million to loan to farmers and to market their crops. By saying market their crops, what I mean is sell their crops. Okay, help them get them to market and sell them. The goal is to keep prices up or at least steady. In the end, this did not work. The government ended up buying the crops from the farmers. And we couldn't keep prices up. So in 1931, a bushel of wheat had gone from $1 to 61 cents a bushel. It's almost a 40% drop in crop prices for wheat farmers. Cotton was worse, going from 16 cents a pound to 6 cents a pound. The government is going to lose about $185 million on this. All right, so if what they're doing right now isn't working, so let's double down on it. Okay, Hoover's going to ask Congress for a limited revision on one of the tariffs. To be specific, the textile tariff. What are textiles? Clothing, cloth, linens. Yes? Okay. And you guys know, I think you studied this a little bit last year, that we do have a fairly large textile industry in New England. You guys remember the triangle, the plant that burned down the textile factory with all the women working in it?
Yes.
The what? Yeah, Triangle Shirt Company. Yeah. Okay, so, I mean, we do have a large textile industry in New England, okay? And so the idea here is to boost tariffs just on textiles coming in from other parts of the world, okay? But what Congress is going to come back with, they agree with Hoover, but they think we need to go further than that, okay? We need to boost tariffs on thousands of items. And so they're going to come up with this new tariff act called the Holy Smoot Tariff Act. Holy Smoot? Anyone? Anyone? Bueller? Bueller? How many people know what I'm talking about? Is that it? Fewer and fewer every year. The movie, Ferris Bueller's Day Off. It's in the movie. Okay. Do you remember the actor that plays the teacher in Ferris Bueller's Day Off? His name's Ben Stein. Yeah, with the guy with the glasses, he used to do these Clear Eyes commercials. He talks real monotone like this, and what most people he had a Comedy Central TV show called Win Ben Stein's Money. He's this really smart guy, and you play this trivia game with him, and if you beat him, you win his money. Okay, he has to pay. Okay, Comedy Central had it on for a few years. What most people don't know about Ben Stein, the actor, is that he's a Harvard-educated economist and an actor. Okay, and so they cast him for this role in this movie, high school kid, Ferris Bueller, that's skipping school. Okay, and it's a crazy, funny movie that every teenager should watch. Okay. Anyhow, Ben Stein's given this role, and they said, well, just talk about something boring in history. And as a Harvard-educated economist, he says, well, okay, I'm going to talk about the Holy Smoot Tariff Act. And here it is. 1930. Okay. And while you're writing that down, I'm going to pull up a clip from Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Sorry, that's hard to read. I shrunk it up on you.
The Republican-controlled House of Representatives, in an effort to alleviate the effects of the the Great Depression, passed the the tariff bill, the Hawley Smoot Tariff Act, which raised or lowered, raised tariffs in an effort to collect more revenue for the federal government. Did it work? Anyone know the effects? It did not work, and the United States sank deeper into the Great Depression. Today, we have a similar debate over this. Anyone know what this is, class? Anyone? Anyone seen this before? The Laffer curve. Anyone know what this says? It says that at this point on the revenue curve, you will get exactly the same amount of revenue as at this point. This is very controversial. Does anyone know what Vice President Bush called this in 1980? Anyone? Something DOO economics. Voodoo economics.
Do you feel like that sometimes?
Absolutely. So that's just a short clip. The whole movie's not that boring. Okay, so it's actually pretty fun. Okay, so yeah, this Hawley-Smoot Tariff Act is really going to doom us. All right, so they're going to boost tariffs on thousands of different products coming into this country. And within 17 months of doing this, our imports and exports, or basically trade with the rest of the world, is cut in half. This is, I mean, you talk about farmers trying to sell their goods overseas. Once these trade wars begin, we're really shooting ourselves in the foot. And so Hawley-Smoot is just another example of how tariffs can impact the economy, and we will sink deeper into depression. Okay, in 1930, 31, 32, so forth. Okay. So Congress is trying to help the situation, but it's having the reverse effect. And this is something to keep in mind. You know, just a couple of small tariffs, President Trump, on the solar industry and on washing machines. Does it go further than that? Will that backfire? Something to keep an eye on. Okay. All right. So yesterday I kind of alluded to this when I talked about margin loans and how people were borrowing money from banks to invest in the stock market. And that when the market crashed, people not only lost their initial investment, but went into debt with the banks, which means banks are not going to be paid back these loans. Now let's talk about farmers, because this banking crisis is really going to start in the rural areas, in places where there are lots of farming, like Kansas. And so most, farmers, their margins of profit are small. And so it's kind of hard to get ahead and, build up this big amount of capital to purchase new equipment, to buy more land. It's hard to raise a lot of capital for farmers. So farmers have to borrow money for those types of things, like building new equipment. Sometimes buying seed, they have to borrow money and hope that it's going to grow and you're going to have a good crop and you're going to be able to sell that for a good price and you're going to be able to make a profit and pay back your loan to the bank. Well, this is where farmers start to really go into trouble, and that means rural banks are really going to get into trouble. Okay, so just looking at these numbers, in 1929, 659 banks closed. In 1930, 1,352. In 1931, 2,294, 1,400. In 1933, over 5,100 banks are going to fail. In all total, guys, this is going to be about a quarter of the banks in the United States. On the test, I'm going to ask you to write about this. Okay? And there are several causes for this. How many of you guys have ever seen the movie It's a Wonderful Life? Jimmy Stewart. Well, that's pretty good. All right? Now, in that movie, they have a situation where Uncle Leo, or whatever his name is, loses the deposit. And there's a crisis at the savings and loan. And people find out that the savings and loan doesn't have much money left. And so everybody rushes to the bank. And this is very similar to what happens in the early 30s in the United States. And so the real underlying problem for banks, when you put your money in the bank, as many of you guys have savings accounts, what does the bank do with your money? It loans it out at an interest rate, and people pay it back, and that's how the banks make money, by loaning it. Okay? Now, this becomes a problem of cash. So, when banks give out money on margin to people to invest in the stock market crashes, and people can't pay those margin loans back to the banks have less cash. When farmers and their crop prices drop and they can't sell their crops for a high enough profit and they can't pay back their loans to the banks have less. We're getting there. Okay? When trade is cut in half and foreign deposits, money from other countries moving through our country to buy and sell goods, that money moves through our banks. And there's a lot less foreign money exchanging and deposited into our banks. The banks have less cash. When people find out that the banks are low on cash, they rush to the banks to get out there, cash. And then the banks run out of cash. It's a problem of cash. Okay? The run on banks. This is the panic. Okay? There's no FDIC. There's no Federal Deposit Insurance Company insuring your money in the banks. So when the banks run out of cash, they close their door. And if you still had money in those banks, it's gone. Most of these banks will never open their doors again. 9 million Americans will lose everything they had in the banks. 9 million. Okay? This is bad. Okay? So, can you explain that process to me on the test? You might want to mention the word. I'll be looking for it.
If we just wrote down cash.
No! That will not work, Sam.
Will we get any points for it?
Yeah. 1 out of 3. That is pretty good. But you're remembering something, and that's important. All right, I have a video to accompany this. It's going to talk about tariffs and bank closures. And it's pretty good, and it reinforces your learning of what we just talked about.
Black Tuesday may have signaled the start of the Great Depression, but the collapse of the stock market wasn't the only cause of the nation's financial woes. The federal government of the 1920s had supported big business with low interest rates and very little governmental regulation, especially over the stock market. In turn, many businesses borrowed more money to expand than they could ever afford to repay. High tariffs that had kept American business owners happy because they kept foreign-made products out of the U.S. unfortunately meant many European countries were unable and increasingly unwilling to buy American-made products. For instance, Germany was barely able to pay the World War I reparations she owed, and high tariffs like the Hawley-Smoot Tariff Act, passed by Congress in 1930, only made matters worse. The tariff's goal was to protect American farmers and manufacturers, but it backfired. America found itself unable to sell her farm goods and manufactured products abroad. World trade in turn faltered as foreign countries imposed severe tariffs of their own in retaliation. Many key industries were struggling even before Black Tuesday. Throughout the boom times of the Roaring '20s, agriculture had been in a tailspin. The textile, steel, automobile, and railroad industries were also beginning to feel the pinch. As the unemployment rate increased, most families bought even less. The gap between the handful of wealthy Americans and the rest of the population got even wider. Even though most Americans had not profited from the economic boom of the 1920s, they bought many exciting new products and services during this era of unrestricted credit, living well beyond their means. The banking industry, too, was hard hit. Some banks had invested heavily in the stock market and helplessly stood by as that money vaporized into thin air. As Americans began to realize the pitiful state of the troubled economy, many panicked and rushed to withdraw their savings from banks. Many banks simply couldn't instantly produce the cash demanded, and instead shut their doors, leaving depositors with nothing. Bank failures wiped out nearly 9 million individual savings accounts. 659 banks were closed in 1929, and by 1933, 1/4 of America's banks had failed.
Okay. Oh, maybe that was the video we just watched, I think. Yep. Okay. All right. So, sorry. Okay. So, the Great Depression begins. How many guys have ever seen this photograph before? It's in pretty much every textbook. It's a Pulitzer Prize winning photograph. Anybody know the name of it? It has a name. This is called Migrant Worker. And as they say, a picture tells 1,000 words. As this woman is huddled with her children, things come to mind. You know, what are the circumstances here? How did I get here? Where am I going to get the next meal? Where do we go from here? A lot of different things can be conjured from this photograph. Okay, so here's your spiral. Okay, factory owners can't sell their products, slow down in production or shut down in production. Workers laid off, unemployment rises. Some people lost their savings in the banks, couldn't buy anything. People lost their jobs, couldn't buy anything. What's going to set in is a severe economic depression, and this is going to spread worldwide. There is not a country on the planet that is not affected by this depression. Every country in the world is going to suffer during this time period. Some worse than others, like Germany. Unemployment by 1932 has reached 12 million. That's about 10% of the population, but it's a far greater number of the working population. Okay, the U.S. population is probably around 130 million at this point, maybe 135 million, but of the workforce, that's larger than 10%. At the height, it reaches about 25% of the working population is unemployed. Okay, so that being said, this is a pretty grim situation. I do want to point out, though, if 25% of the population is unemployed, that means that 75% of the population is employed. So you get this picture in your head of the Great Depression. Is it a picture that says basically the country comes to a halt? There's no economic activity. Everybody is in dire straits. That just is not the case. Okay, the country does continue to roll on. There is just a lot of suffering when it comes to, feeding your family, putting a roof over your head, homelessness. And really, homelessness, guys, is the great tragedy of the Great Depression. There's nothing worse than losing the roof over your head, and for a lot of people. And in fact, that's what Hoover calls it. I mean, he says the great tragedy of the Depression is homelessness. And so what people would do, if you think about this spiral downward, is you lose your job. Let's say you have a home, but you have a mortgage you still have to pay on. So you want to keep that roof over your head and your family over their head. And so what do? You start selling stuff to get money to keep the roof over your head. What are you going to sell? Stuff in your house, like your furniture. Jewelry. Maybe not the wedding band, but guys, in some cases it came to that. You might sell your car or one of your cars because some people held on to the car because when they lose their homes, most cars have roofs, and that becomes the roof over your head. How many of you guys seen the movie Cinderella Man? If you haven't, it's a great movie. Really portrays the Depression era well in color, because a lot of these older movies like The Grapes of Wrath are in black and white, and it's hard to get. I used to show The Grapes of Wrath in my history class to my seniors every year, but half the class fell asleep, so I stopped showing. No, we have no time. There's no time. So here's the thing. Cinderella Man. It's easy to find on the internet or on Netflix or something like that. Okay, take a couple hours of time. But anyhow, it's a great story, and the Depression is very well portrayed in that film. Now, how many of you guys have had to read The Grapes of Wrath or seen the movie? Okay, it's written by John Steinbeck. Okay, it's a very important piece of American literature that seems to be going by the wayside. It does have very strong socialist undertones to it, because the answer here, guys, for many people, is that democracy has failed. Capitalism has failed. And you can't really blame some people for thinking that during the Depression. Some would say, call it a democratic malaise. And people really begin to question our system. And they're going to look to other systems to get us out of this depression. So you're going to get maybe some more radical ideologies popping up, like communism. Okay, that people think that we need to go to a different system. All right? Another factor here, guys, is, I said 75% of people have jobs. Well, a lot of those people that do have jobs are working part-time. Let me kind of give you an example. Colwich has one grocery store. What's it called? Kraus. Okay? How many people do you think work at Kraus? Anybody work at Kraus? Let's say they have 10 full-time employees. Okay? The Depression hits. People are buying fewer and fewer goods from Kraus grocery store. Okay? In Colwich, Kansas. And the owners of Kraus need to lay off some of the workers. But if you lay off 5 of your full-time staff, those 5 people have no income to keep a roof over their head. So what a lot of businesses did was made everybody part-time, so that some people would have at least some income to feed their families with. Okay, and so the unemployment rate of 25% doesn't really tell the whole story. You have a lot of people that are underemployed, if that makes sense. Okay? So those that did lose everything, lost their home, ran out of money, nowhere to go, they would gather in empty, vacant lots, parks, and so forth, and basically build little shanty towns out of cardboard, scraps of wood, stone, rock, whatever they could get their hands on. Some, you might be able to find some corrugated metal or something that you could borrow from somebody or something. Okay, This picture down here on the bottom right is a picture of the Hooverville in Central Park, New York City. Okay, obviously during the winter time. And the Hooverville in New York City was fairly large. And this over here is a homestead or a farm that has been abandoned. And this is very difficult because, you know, farms, a lot of these are generational and they've been passed down from one family to another. Doesn't mean they're all paid off or they can pay the property taxes on them and so forth. And then let's just throw in, for the farmers, a drought. Add insult to injury. You can't sell any crops, now you can't grow any crops. And this is going to be a hard time for those folks. And that's what the movie, the book, The Grapes of Wrath is about farmers, some farmers from Oklahoma. They call them Okies, okay? And basically the premise of the book is follows this, the protagonist in this film is Henry Fonda plays Jode, the Jode family, okay? And he gets out of jail. He had been in jail, and he goes back home, and the family's packing up to move because they've been evicted from the farm. Now, generally, evictions took place by sheriff. The sheriff would come, okay? I think I might have mentioned, I don't know if it was this class or not, I actually had a neighbor a few weeks ago that was evicted. And foreclosure on a house in my neighborhood, which is really sad. And the police came to enforce the foreclosure, and it's tough. And so you have, you know, generations that your family has lived on this farm, and the sheriff has to come and tell you, you have to vacate, you have to leave. So the number of farms lost, it's on the next slide. It's like 1 million family farms between 1930 and 1934 are going to be lost. 1 million family farms. This is going to have an impact on society. Marriage rates are going to drop by 1/3. People can't afford to start a family. College enrollment is going to sink, obviously. I mean, at this point, people that are going to college are mostly your wealthy folk anyways. That's going to sink, and there will be a lot of hunger. Guys, I have looked, and I have not found anywhere in the United States during the Depression that people starved to death, like famine. Okay, it wasn't that situation. There was plenty of food. Okay, there were hungry people. There were malnourished people. There were malnourished children, which leads to more problems, health problems. Okay, so, but nobody starved to death, if you understand. Okay. Okay. What time is this? 50? 55? Okay. All right. So desperate people. Was there some violence, some looting, as you would expect during such hard times? Yes. There was some of that. It wasn't out of control. There were these forced evictions that I spoke of that sometimes did become confrontational. People stealing food, yes, it was common. That's one of those moral things, one of those moral questions. Is it okay to steal to feed your family? No. What? The ends don't justify the means.
I don't know, but is it also something that's
If your children are going to starve, you're not allowed to steal?
No, that's the situation.
Jackson's saying no.
I'm telling you, the church will tell you that.
The church will tell you no.
I don't know. It would lessen your vulnerability.
Guys, we are having a religion scholars ball on Monday. Are any of you guys participating? All right, people. Lorraine, can you add anything to this?
I agree with Patty.
All right. Remember, I talked about this, right? The 1 million family farms. And I want to just kind of bring this up because there's some misconceptions. How many people would you say lived on the average family farm in 1932? We got 8 over here. What else we got? 8 as well.
Wait, how many people on each family farm?
Yeah.
13 and a half.
You got mom and pa, right? You got some kids. Lots of kids, 4 or 5 kids. You got grandma, grandpa.
Maybe some uncles, maybe some aunts.
The aunt that never marries. Let's be conservative, and we'll say 8. Okay? That's 8 million people. 8 million people that have to move, emigrate in that 4-year period. Where do these people go? Most of them will go to the cities. Now, the book, The Grapes of Wrath, okay, in the movie, the Joad family does what a lot of other families do, and they go west to California. Now, in California, because of the weather and the climate, you know what they grow in California? A lot of what? Well, fruits and vegetables, right? Fruits and vegetables, yes? Okay? And so there's jobs, okay, picking the fruit and vegetables, labor, migrant work. And so a lot of people go to California in the hope for jobs. The problem is a lot of people went to California in the hope for those jobs, which means there wasn't enough jobs. It became a situation where when people would come traveling through these towns, the people that lived in these towns didn't want these people coming there. They'd already seen a lot of people coming there, and they don't want more people coming there, taking their jobs. Sound familiar? Like another debate? Okay. Now, what Steinbeck does with this is he shows the plight of these workers, because the owners of the farms that you're picking fruit or what have you, right? They know they got you. They'll give you a little hut to live in, you and your family, and they'll say, okay, if you pick this many pieces of fruit, you can stay in the hut. And if you need to buy anything outside of that, here's a commissary over here that you can get some tokens for by picking more fruit. You get tokens and you can buy stuff at our store. And they give you just enough to keep you there. But you never get out of the hole. You know what I mean? And so Steinbeck comes up in this movie and brings in the government. And the government is the savior. Okay? And you go to this different camp that the government set up, and it's far better. Okay? And so this is your socialist undertones of The Grapes of Wrath. Okay? But it's an important piece of literature and worth mentioning, since I'm not showing you the movie. Okay? All right. Now, the bonus army. Remember the Adjusted Compensation Act that we spoke of a few days ago? This was the bonus bill, where you got $1 for every day you served at home, $1.25 for every day you served overseas. It was an insurance policy that you could borrow up to 25%. Remember, we came up with about $821, and you could borrow $25%, $205. And that might get a veteran into an apartment and a new set of clothes to go look for a job. Jackson, you need to watch my videos. Okay. Now, that's the bonus bill. Well, when the Depression hits, I told you guys, this is coming back. And you're going to see 25,000, 20 to 25,000 veterans march to Washington in support of a piece of legislation that will allow the veterans to cash in their insurance policy now. Okay? Now these people, these 25,000, unlike you guys that went on the March for Life, do not have money to buy hotel rooms. So where are they going to stay? Well, Hoover actually opens up some empty government buildings and allows them to crash in these buildings. Okay? Some of them set up in, tents and stuff in the parks. And but this is 20 to 25,000 people. Some of them bring their families. They have nothing from where they are. So they're coming here and trying to get it. The bill fails. Another congressman comes up with a bill that says, we'll give every veteran $500. That fails. The government doesn't have the money to do this. Remember, these don't mature till 1945, these policies. And so most of the people leave and go home, wherever that is. But about 2,000, 2,500 have nowhere to go. So they just stay. And they become a nuisance. They're marching. Sometimes there's some riots, some looting going on with these people. A little bit more of a radical group of people that have stuck around to stir up trouble in the view of Hoover. And so Hoover gets tired of it. So he calls in the army. Okay? Now I have two names on here. Mac and Ike. You guys know who Ike is. Eisenhower. Okay. Who's Mac? General Douglas MacArthur. Okay. Here's a good picture on the right here of MacArthur and Eisenhower. Eisenhower's puffing on a cigarette. Okay. That's Mac. That's Mac. That's Eisenhower. Okay. I'll pass that. Oh, it's falling apart. Oh. Passed that around too many times. So anyhow, Hoover's going to call in the army. Now, I want you to think of I don't know, is irony the right word? Who are these people that are causing problems? Veterans of the Army. So Hoover's calling in the Army to deal with the veterans. Now, you guys know what the term optics means?
Yes.
The optics, like the lens, how this looks. Yeah. The optics of this are bad. Okay? All right. Saved for another generation. All right. So, yeah. So, we're sending in the cavalry, guys. The army starts marching towards this big shanty town, this camp that these veterans have built. Okay? And if you're a veteran and you see the cavalry in formation marching down the street, your first inclination is, hey, it's a parade. Nah, it's not a parade. They're coming there to remove you. And one of the best ways to get you to leave out of your little shanty hut is to burn it. Or use tear gas. That sometimes works. This is the result. You can see the Capitol in the background. Okay? This is bad news right here. Okay? There are going to be a couple people die in this. Hoover has just called out the army on its own citizens in the nation's capital. Now, how many times in American history, not British history, I'm thinking of the Boston Massacre type thing, right? Or Lexington and Concord, right? In American history, have you seen the U.S. military used on its own citizens? Okay. But mostly it was militia shutting down the rebellion, but yeah. Okay. Good one. Have you guys ever heard of Kent State University in Ohio? Back in 1972, Vietnam War protests on the college campus. National Guard called in. You've got 18, 19, 21, 22-year-olds on the college campus protesting the war. You've got 18, 19, 21, 22-year-olds in the National Guard there to stop the protest. And it turned ugly. And 4 people are going to be killed on the campus of Kent State, Ohio. There are a couple other examples that we can bring up, but it looks like we're running out of time because Lauren's getting ready for lunch. You guys have a great weekend, and we'll pick up from here, talk a little bit more about the bonus army, and I'll show you a video.